In our first episode, we go en route with Ambikaipalan, Associate General Counsel of Uber APAC. Together with our host, Junian Bond, CEO of Maxwell Chambers, they will explore the intersections of technology, regulations, and the effects of automation on society.
Welcome to our Maxwell En-Route podcast. So tell us a bit more about yourself and your role in Uber.
Thanks, Junian. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. My name is Ambikaipalan. I'm the Associate General Counsel for Uber in APAC, which is the Asia Pacific region, based here in Singapore. Growing up, I actually wanted to be a journalist.
Really?
Instead of a lawyer. And as a good Sri Lankan daughter, I followed my parents' guidance. So it's really exciting for me to be here on a podcast, bringing my two worlds together. I think young Anu is very excited about the grown-up Anu. But in my role, I lead a fantastic group of about 50 lawyers across the region. And they deal with everything, all legal, regulatory, commercial issues facing our markets, which include the ANZ region, North Asia, and India and South Asia. Before this role, I was the legal director for employment law for APAC and EMEA.
Right.
So I've been at Uber for 7.5 years, which has given me numerous opportunities to work on really exciting things, see the company grow, develop, pre-IPO, post-IPO, and it's just been a phenomenal ride. So looking forward to many more years on the Uber ride.
Lovely. So, Uber is one of the tech companies that everyone would have heard of in the new economy, right? And the current hot topic in tech, everyone's sort of enamored by it right now, is about the rise of AI. Although specifically it's generative AI, but people sort of lump it together with AI in general. But to tech insiders like yourself, AI isn't exactly new. It's something that has been around for a while. If you broadly define AI as, an algorithm that allows, the decision making to be done without human input. If you broadly define it as that, then AI has been around for a while, and certainly Uber uses AI. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, you're totally right. AI, machine learning, a lot of this has been around for a number of years, and you may actually not realize it when you use technology that it is AI that's behind it. So if you're opening up the Rides app and you want to get from A to B, AI may be used to suggest what type of vehicle you want to take, whether it's an Uber X, whether it's an Uber Black, and that might depend on the location or the time of the day. And so once you select, which trip you want, it may also show how long it's going to take, the ETA. And so all of that is powered by AI. And then it sends the trip to a driver who may be willing to take that earning opportunity. And so all of that behind the scenes is really using AI to make the experience as seamless and efficient as possible. Same thing when you get on Uber Eats or any of the other food delivery apps. If you open it up at breakfast, AI may be showing you different options to when it's dinner time, right?
Right.
So a lot of that is actually all going on behind the scenes. Similarly, things like routing, a lot of that information on how long a trip is going to take, the estimated time of arrival, is based on data that's been collected based on the roads, the time of the day, the weather, your particular location, and really finessing the ETA comes from a lot of the technology that, is really machine learning and AI. But you're right when you talk about generative AI. I think that's what's new and exciting. So people, 12 months ago weren't even talking about AI, and all of a sudden there's been this boom of discussion about how we look at AI. What people are really talking about is generative AI, things like ChatGPT, where there's a whole bunch of information that is generating an outcome, whether it's a picture, whether it's your resume for a new job, whether it's, a news article. That is what's exciting, I think, about this new era of technology and AI.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you see, I think the speed of it is what's super interesting, but also the fact that it's kind of a consumer-friendly app. In the past, it's been very much used by engineers and tech insiders, and now a novice can use generative AI and produce something. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of these generative AI technology hasn't yet been fully adopted by enterprise customers or enterprise tech.
Sure.
And so I think that's going to be an area of development, just to see how it's developing, what's going into it, etc.
I want to jump into that because you actually made a couple of interesting points. One is the speed at which things are developing. And the second is that for the first time, AI is directly accessible by the consumer rather than it's sort of hidden behind a layer of other apps that are done by enterprises. So you kind of interact with the AI via someone's UI and UX. But here I can directly go to an AI and get things done, which of course we know is powered by the rise of the LLMs, the large language models that are behind ChatGPT and so on. But that raises questions as well that people have now because first of all, it's changing so fast, you don't really know what's going to happen, good or bad. And secondly, the consumer may not be sure of what they're using or how they ought to use it, as opposed to people who are working within a company. You are focused on this as your job. You know where the OB markers are. The consumer may not, and you might end up doing something or relying on it in a way that you weren't supposed to. So that actually brings up the question of, is there a role for the government to regulate, to deal with this? Because like for Uber, Uber started before regulations were in place for all of these various tools that you use, whether it's labor, whether it's, to some degree, even the ride sharing concept. And in some places, it's a gray area as well still. And now AI is in that same place, where the tech is there before the laws were put in place. What are your thoughts on this? How do you balance between, on one hand, protecting the consumer while still giving enough space for innovation?
Yeah. I think actually if you take a step back, the bigger question is between tech and regulation. And this is actually not a new phenomenon. Now we're dealing with AI and the tech coming before regulation. There's crypto, where tech's coming before
That's
regulation.
right, yeah.
Before that, it was apps like Uber, tech coming before regulation. Before that, it's like Microsoft, tech coming before regulation. So I think this pattern will always exist.
Right.
And I think it's just natural that tech will always be ahead of regulation. What's going to be interesting, I think, and what we've seen in the past is how tech works with regulators and governments. And the approach that governments take often depend on their particular market, their social fabric, what's important to them. We see some markets now take a really hardline approach on AI, and others really taking a backseat, seeing how the tech develops and then figuring out regulations that are going to be fit for purpose. I think what we saw at Uber was very much that same breadth of response. There were some markets that went in hard and said, shut down your rideshare product. This is not allowed in our country. There were others who kind of waited to see the impact of it, saw that consumers really needed it, saw that there was a market fit, and then came in to regulate. And then there were some that were actually, relatively welcoming and wanted to work and partner with us. And so over time, you kind of see how governments and regulators respond and need to adapt accordingly.
So how does Uber actually, interface with these government agencies? Are you proactive? Do you go out there and try to sort of like meet them and, or is it only when things sort of come back to you and say, hey, what are you doing? Then how does Uber do it? Actually?
Yeah, I think we've seen our response to regulatory development change over the years. And I think that's standard across most tech companies. When you're at that initial stage of hyper growth, needing to get into every market, often looking at regulatory frameworks and how they operate doesn't fit with your business model. And, Uber was one of many companies that's kind of also had that approach of going in, operating in a grey area, really building that consumer base. And then the governments realize that they need to reach out and work with tech. We've seen that develop under new leadership, with Dara and in the last 5.5 years, our response to regulatory intervention and relationships has really changed. And we see the benefits in partnering closely with regulators to develop frameworks that are fit for purpose. So I do think there's an element of seeing where a tech company is in its growth trajectory and how it responds to government intervention and regulatory framework. But at the end of the day, I think it's reasonable to assume that every company does want to get regulated, right? You want to be operating in an environment that people know is, kind of approved by lawmakers.
Yep.
It's operating in an area of trust, and they know that the way that the tech is being built and functioning is within the guardrails that are permitted in that market. So at the end of the day, I think a big element of regulatory development is trust. Not only trust with regulators, but also trust with consumers. And that's, I think, always a key factor to the success of any sort of tech. If I think about an analogy, champagne and sparkling wine, right? You want to know that the champagne is from Champagne because it's legit.
Yeah.
You don't want the sparkling wine. And so I could sometimes see that with tech. You want to know that it's legit. You want to know that it's, regulated by the relevant authority, and you're not getting the sparkling wine.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fairly real sort of concern from people because they can't actually see what goes on under the hood. And in a way, you rely on someone else, in this case, hopefully the regulators, that they've taken a look at this and they've decided that, okay, it is providing that social benefit with all the, right sort of safeguards in place. And that's what you rely on the government to do. Whereas tech companies, I guess, are constantly in that tension to say, look, we are also responsible actors. So you need to give us some space to move, but you need to trust that we are not going to abuse that freedom. And it depends, I suppose, on each country, each set of, people who say, well, I'm skeptical of tech companies, especially if they come from a particular country. So I'd rather my government was a bit more heavy-handed. And other people will be like, no, I mean, we're comfortable with that. We have our own tech companies in our country. So we think you shouldn't get involved. We would rather the companies have the freedom to improve our lives without being held back. Because I think the word we'll go back to is the speed at which AI is evolving. I think that has always been the biggest criticism of regulations. Not necessarily that they're tight or heavy-handed, but they're slow. And it just takes too long. And if you're competing in the commercial space to be the first to market or the second to market, and you have to wait for the government to decide whether they let you, that could be a huge problem for a commercial company.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's why you see a lot of these companies really push the boundaries. And the ones that have the guts and the willingness to operate in that grey area before there's regulation are the ones that really kind of cause that breakthrough for governments to take notice and say, okay, now this is an area that we need to really focus on and partner on. I think the interesting part of AI is that it's so broad, right? I think people still, even now, don't fully understand what is AI, what is its capabilities, how far can this go. Even recently, I think, in the US, they're kind of really looking at setting up workshops for how senators can understand AI. And that, I think, is something that we've, used as a tool to educate regulators, show us how the app works. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is how a marketplace works when it's using technology and it's dynamic. Because you can't expect governments and regulators to know what's happening under the hood. You need to be able to communicate that effectively. And it's not only regulators, right? Consumers also want to know what's happening. They want to be able to trust it. So for us, it's also been really important to make sure that drivers and couriers and anybody who's using the app to make money also can trust the underlying tech. And so some things we do are like release blog posts and we say, hey, this is how our tech works. This is how the algorithms work. One of the more popular blog posts we have is called What Moves Us. And it essentially shows like what moves the marketplace and the app.
That's a nice play on words.
Yeah, it's kind of, one way that you can build that trust in the product that it's actually doing the right thing.
But here's a question I have, because if you look at it from the point of view of the people who use the app and benefit from it, then they will be more than happy at the rapid development of the new features and tools powered by AI. But what about the people who feel threatened by these developments, the people who feel like I may lose my job or I may have to adapt to a new reality which I'm not comfortable with? And at some point, we know that the world will change. We know that you cannot hold on to an old job forever. We don't have people in telephone exchanges anymore. We don't have typing pools. But the fact is, historically, these changes happen at a more gradual pace. People were able to adapt. People were able to reskill and relearn. But the way AI is moving, we're not talking generations or decades. We're not even talking years. We are talking possibly even months that people could find themselves irrelevant, whether you're a digital artist, whether you are a music composer, whether you are a person whose job is in the drafting space. So I think that's one of the concerns for regulators, where there may be a social benefit, and there will certainly be people who will be more than happy to use the tools. But how do I protect, to some degree, the people who the change is moving too quickly and their livelihoods are at stake? So what are your thoughts on this? Should we be afraid of AI, or should we find a way to help and embrace it? Whatever.
I mean, maybe in the future, these are two AI bots that are talking about
exactly. We might not even be here.
Right? No, I mean, I think as generations go, we've all had to adapt to technology. Uber, for example, really came in and disrupted what was traditionally a taxi industry, point-to-point transport. And we started to realize that actually when taxi drivers used apps like Uber, they realized how much more efficient they were able to be. They, instead of waiting at taxi ranks, they could see where people were looking for rides. They could ride there. They could make money, on demand.
Right.
So, I think any sort of technology actually moves us in the right direction and changes how we think about work, what we're focusing on, and what we're going to spend our time on.
Right.
And, I think about the legal industry over the years. We've developed from dictaphones to, typing, for discovery, for litigation purposes. We all used to sit there and actually have to read through documents, and now we've got e-discovery. It's kind of made our lives more efficient.
Right.
So we're able to focus on more value add.
Does your legal team use AI?
Yeah, well, we have definitely found ways of taking technology like machine learning to the next level. And, there's only so few lawyers who can support the growing business. And one area that we really focus on is compliance, particularly regulatory compliance. And in many of our markets, we have obligations to report to regulators about certain incidents or notify them in the event of something occurring on the app. And we previously did that using support agents who might sit in the Philippines or in, Australia, who would review tickets that would come through from customers about a ride, and they would search for keywords and say, okay, we think this particular ticket or incident might be notifiable. It would go through a process and then would notify the regulator. That obviously takes time, it takes manpower, and there's a scope for potential human error.
Right.
We worked with our data science team to use machine learning to build out a process that simulated that decision-making process. So the machine learning model was kind of fed all the keywords. It reviewed, obviously, a larger number of tickets in a faster period of time, and then was able to pull out the number of tickets which it believed needed to be notified.
Right.
And then there was a human interaction in between, which reviewed all those tickets to confirm whether or not they'd be notifiable to the regulator or not. And it, cut down on agent time. It improved efficiency. It improved our cost structure as well. And that was us really kind of leveraging technology that we use for our app or engineering purposes to improve legal and regulatory compliance.
Right.
So,
wow.
And it's something that's scalable. We can use it in multiple
Sure.
countries now that we've built the system. So super cool, and, really excited to kind of see how legal can add value using some of these tech.
No, thanks for that, because I think that's really one illustration of what I think I'm hearing on the ground from people, that the way to perceive AI in terms of how it would change the way we work, is not to look at it from a binary point of view where it's either going to take your job or it's not.
Yeah.
But actually, if we look at it as a tool that if you use it properly, will enhance what you do.
Yeah.
And it will reduce some of the more mundane aspects of your work. But you'll still have a job. It's just that you will be able to do more with it.
Yeah.
And we know that we live in a world where you don't have a shortage of work in some spaces.
Yeah.
This actually makes things easier, that you could actually do more things.
Yeah.
And one analogy I had, which someone told me, which I thought was really interesting, was how in the past you would have window cleaners and street sweepers. And there are some companies which are pioneering the use of AI, where you have a human controller that manipulates several cleaning robots. Now, would you say that because one person could now control 5 robots, that 4 cleaners have lost their jobs? That's one possible way to look at it.
Yeah.
Another way to look at it is that I can clean my windows 5 times more often.
Yeah.
So I have cleaner buildings, and no one loses a job. So I think it's really a question of how you use the AI rather than to just blame the technology and to say that, its arrival will be bad for us. I think that's a very pessimistic way of looking at it. And the historical trends don't really show that, because people do still want to preserve jobs. People still want to make sure that they take care of their employees. But what more can I do for my consumer? I think that's how we should look at AI.
Totally agree. And really just adapting to new technology, right? As generations go, people will grow up with this technology, and so they'll find other ways to do jobs or maybe create new industries that, don't exist now.
Yeah. And I think one of the things which, when you mentioned about the taxi drivers, that's really interesting, because it also sounds like there is a part of the journey that involves changing people's mindsets, where because they have a false idea of what the tech is and what it does, they only imagine the worst.
Yeah.
But then when you start to use it and you realize that, what I thought was a threat is actually now an asset, then suddenly the acceptance, just grows.
Yeah.
Because people realize that, like one of the things I noticed that, some of the smaller hawker stalls that sell food in Singapore and they're on these apps, you can't call and order food in advance from them without using the app anymore.
Yeah.
And I wondered why, because there's a fee that's involved. So why would you give up, that extra fee just to make someone use the app?
Yeah.
But what I realize now is you actually end up getting your money when someone orders via the app, whether or not they collect the food.
Yeah.
Whereas if I called and you prepared the food, but I changed my mind, then you now have something which you can't sell.
Yeah.
So from the hawker and the food seller's point of view, the app gives me assured payment, even though there's a fee involved, and I would rather do that because I've had too many people, disappear on me after the food's prepared.
Yeah.
So these are things which aren't obvious at the start when people ask, wow, should I pay this fee to be on this app? But they've used it for a while and they realize in the long run, it makes sense. It solves another problem which I could never solve.
Yeah.
And that's worth it.
Yeah.
So I think maybe for AI, that's the same kind of journey that we have to help people understand that, there may be some trade-offs, there may be some things you're concerned about, but on the whole, the benefits far outweigh it.
Yeah.
And you just have to accept that it comes with both good and bad side of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, hawker centres are a really good example. In Taiwan, there are a lot of wet markets, which are fresh grocery, fresh food. And an innovation that we built in Taiwan was being able to order from wet markets on the app. So, a lot of those stall owners during COVID in particular, similar to many other local smaller retailers across the world, were able to move online pretty quickly, continue to operate their business by embracing the technology. So, I'm really excited about AI. I think if we find the right framework in which for it to work and people trust it and we can see the benefits, I think it's going to really change how people work, how people live, and interact with each other on a day-to-day basis.
Do you see actually any kind of trends or developments that you feel like it's likely to happen in the way, either in the development of AI or the use of AI,
Yeah, I mean, one exciting thing that we see at Uber and we're partnering with, and it's predominantly mostly in the US, is self-driving cars.
Right.
Really exciting opportunity and, what will the future hold? I think all of us kind of grew up thinking of flying jets by this time. So I think the technology's got a long way to go still, but
Right.
seeing it, and I know many of my colleagues have been in the self-driving cars, their mind is just blown at the technology and how it operates. So, I think that's going to be a really exciting area to see how self-driving cars develops on the AI front. I think another area and trend that we really need to be focusing on is kind of sustainability and how we can improve our impact on the planet by using technology. So, more greener vehicles for us on the Uber platform, sustainable packaging. A lot of that, I think, is where the future is.
Right.
And governments are definitely leaning into that. I think we're seeing that a lot more in recent years. And for many of us who are living at the moment in the heat or the crazy weather that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, I think we really appreciate the fact that we need to make some serious changes to how we're impacting the environment.
Oh, definitely. And in fact, the interesting thing about this self-driving cars thing is that as a concept, it's not difficult to wrap your head around what this is. But the engineering challenges are really, really much greater than, because if you look as far back as movies like Minority Report, where Tom Cruise basically, was in a future world. And I heard that they actually got a futurist to be a consultant on the show to of give some advice about what kind of tech you could see at that point in the future. And one of the things that they really got right, in my opinion, was the cars. Where in the urban areas, you had self-driving cars and things were moving really quickly. Some of them were even going up the buildings. But when you went out into the suburbs, then you didn't have self-driving cars anymore. You had people who continued to drive. And I think that kind of makes sense, because I think, first of all, it's going to be really tricky to try to, create a digital map of every tiny little country road. And people want to drive at some level. There's that freedom. There's, the kind of thing that you are able to move around. But in a city, I think the concern is once you allow everyone to drive, like today, you end up with, traffic jams, gridlock, accidents. All sorts of issues, pollution and so on. Whereas if you automate all the cars in the city, where the greater good outweighs your freedom in that sense, it kind of makes sense to have these two kind of regimes. One where in certain places you can drive and certain places you can't. And that would be really interesting, because I imagine you may not have traffic lights in the city in the future. You just have cars zipping at high speed across each other because they've already pre-negotiated with each other whose goes at when, and then, just make your turn and you... so stuff like that.
I'm waiting to see you consult on a movie, Junian.
No, my goodness, I'm living in the present, unfortunately. But it's fun to imagine this, because you can see how it affects some people in terms of their basically their lifestyles. Old people who struggle to move around, they have mobility issues, they have eyesight issues, and they have no one who can take them around. There may come a point where you have personalized transport vehicles that, driven by AI, that could take these people around. So they don't feel like I'm stuck at home until my son or my daughter-in-law comes and whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
But I have a little bit of my own mobility. And I think that's going to be, game-changing for many people.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, this has been amazing. Just before we end off, I thought I want to ask you something a bit more personal, because I noticed on your LinkedIn, your Twitter bio, you mentioned about being an aunt, to all your nieces and your nephews. So what advice would you give to your nieces and nephews about what they should do and what they should be like in a world that's rapidly changing?
Yeah, I would always tell them to be kind. I think people don't remember what you say or what you did. I think they always remember how you made them feel. And so genuine human kindness, I think, will always go a long way. And I do hope that technology is never going to take that away. Who knows? But I think people will always be grateful for someone who was kind to them.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Anu. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here with us.
Thank you.
And we wish you all the best in your work and your family.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise. Thank you.